What if the true price of a simple cup of coffee wasn't $4, but 4 billion? For Audrey Rosewood, a struggling waitress with an artist's soul, a single act of kindness towards a weary old man in a worn-out coat was just another Tuesday. She had no idea she was pouring her last few dollars into the cup of Harrison Sterling, a reclusive titan of industry. He wasn't just looking for caffeine, he was conducting a secret, desperate search for an heir to his entire empire. He needed someone with integrity, not ambition. And in a world of vipers, he found a rose. This is the story of how paying for a stranger's coffee ignited a war for a legacy, proving that the greatest fortunes aren't inherited by blood, but earned by character. The scent of burnt sugar and dark roast coffee clung to Audrey Rosewood's apron like a second skin. It was the smell of survival, the gilded bean, a cozy cafe nestled on a less-than-gilded street in New York City, was her sanctuary and her prison. Its warm amber light and the constant hiss of the espresso machine were the soundtrack to her perpetually deferred dreams. On the small canvas of her life, this cafe was a relentless, sepia-toned background. Outside, a relentless October drizzle slicked the streets, turning the city into a watercolor painting of muted grays and blurry neon. Inside, Audrey moved with an economy of motion born from years of practice. She refilled sugar shakers, wiped down the marble countertop, and offered tired smiles to the lunchtime crowd, all while a storm of calculations raged in her mind. Rent was due Friday. Leo's prescription needed a refill. The good canvas, the cerulean blue she desperately needed for her latest piece, would have to wait. Again. Her life was a tightrope walk over a chasm of debt, and her younger brother Leo was the precious weight she carried on her shoulders. His cystic fibrosis was a cruel thief, stealing his breath and her savings with equal impunity. Every dollar she earned, every tip she pocketed, was first triaged for his needs. Her art, her real passion, was fed only the scraps. Her gaze drifted to the corner of her station, where she'd propped up a small, postcard-sized painting she'd done of the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn. It was a study in hope, with hues of soft pink and brilliant orange breaking through the industrial gray. It was a reminder of what she was fighting for. Her coworker Sam, a sharp-witted pragmatist with a heart of gold, bumped her hip. "Daydreaming about your big gallery opening again, Rosewood?" Sam teased, expertly balancing 3 lattes on one arm. Audrey forced a smile. "Just trying to manifest a reality where a tube of paint doesn't cost more than a meal." It was then that he walked in. He didn't command attention. In fact, he seemed to repel it. He was an old man, stooped and frail, draped in a tweed overcoat that had seen better decades. His shoes were scuffed, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, held a profound weariness. He looked less like a customer and more like someone seeking refuge from the cold. He shuffled to the counter, his movements slow and deliberate, and scanned the menu board as if the prices were written in a foreign language. Just a black coffee, please," he rasped, his voice thin and dry. Audrey nodded, her professional smile softening into something more genuine. There was a vulnerability about him that resonated with her. He reminded her of the forgotten figures she loved to sketch in the park, people whose stories were etched on their faces, ignored by the rushing city. She brewed the coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. As she placed the steaming cup on the counter, he fumbled inside his coat, his brow furrowed in concentration. His hands patted his pockets, then his trousers, a slow, dawning panic flickering in his eyes. It seems I've forgotten my wallet," he murmured, his voice laced with embarrassment. He looked down at the cup, then at her, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'm so sorry to have wasted your time." A familiar scene. Audrey had seen it before. Usually it was followed by a manager's curt dismissal, but looking at the old man's downcast face, she didn't see a freeloader. She saw a moment of simple human frailty. She thought of Leo, of the times they'd had to count out change for a loaf of bread. Without a second thought, she reached for the small jar where she kept her own tips, the meager collection of coins and crumpled bills that was supposed to go towards her art supplies. She pulled out a $5 bill. "Don't you worry about it," she said softly, ringing up the sale. It's on me today. Everyone has one of those days. The man looked up, his pale eyes widening slightly. He seemed genuinely stunned, not just by the offer, but by the casual kindness with which it was delivered. He stared at her, his gaze intense, as if he were trying to commit her face to memory. "You don't have to do that, young lady," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "I know," Audrey replied, pushing the cup towards him, "but a good cup of coffee on a rainy day can fix just about anything. Please, enjoy it." She gave him his change from her bill. "And here, in case you need it for the bus." He took the change, his cool, papery fingers brushing against hers. A strange little jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He didn't say thank you. He just continued to look at her, a complex emotion swirling in those tired eyes. Surprise, gratitude, and something else. Something that felt like appraisal. "What's your name?" he asked. Audrey Rosewood." "Audrey," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. He finally picked up the cup, his grip still a bit unsteady. "Thank you." He shuffled over to a small table in the corner, the one with the wobbly leg that everyone avoided. He sat there for nearly an hour, nursing the single cup of black coffee, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. But every few minutes, Audrey would feel his eyes on her. It wasn't a creepy stare, but an observant, contemplative one. He watched her handle a belligerent customer demanding a refund for a half-eaten muffin, saw her slip a leftover croissant into a bag for a homeless woman who came by every afternoon, and noticed how she patiently explained the difference between a macchiato and a cortado to a confused tourist. He was watching her character. She just thought he was a lonely old man. When he finally left, he placed the empty cup neatly on the table and gave her a final, almost imperceptible nod. As Audrey cleared the table, she noticed something he'd left behind. It wasn't a tip. It was the change she had given him, stacked in a neat little tower beside the salt shaker. He hadn't spent a penny of it. It was a message, though she couldn't yet decipher its meaning. She sighed, pocketing the coins. $4.75. That was the price of her kindness. Or so she thought. The old man became a fixture at the Gilded Bean. He started coming in every day, always in the late afternoon when the lunch rush had subsided. He always wore the same worn tweed coat and always ordered the same thing, one black coffee. He introduced himself simply as Harry, and he always paid with exact change, never mentioning the day he'd forgotten his wallet. And Audrey never brought it up. It became their silent, shared secret. Their conversations started small. He'd ask about her day. She'd ask if he needed a refill. But soon the daily ritual deepened into something more. Harry was a remarkable listener. He'd sit at his wobbly corner table, and Audrey would find herself leaning against the counter during lulls, telling him things she rarely shared with anyone but Sam. She told him about Leo, about the rhythmic hum of his nebulizer that was the background music of their tiny apartment. She described the constant fear that lived in the back of her mind, a shadow that darkened even her brightest days. Harry listened without pity, his pale eyes filled with a quiet understanding that was more comforting than any platitude. "He's a fighter," Audrey said one afternoon, her voice thick with a mixture of pride and worry. "He wants to be a video game designer. He spends hours on his laptop creating entire worlds. He says it's the only place he can run without getting tired." Harry nodded slowly. "A creator, like you." It was the first time he'd acknowledged her art. One day she had brought in a new small piece to show Sam, a miniature oil painting of a single, defiant weed growing through a crack in the pavement, its tiny yellow flower reaching for the sun. Harry had walked up to the counter just as she was putting it away. "May I?" he'd asked, his voice gentle. Hesitantly, Audrey showed it to him. He held the small canvas with a reverence that startled her. He didn't just glance at it. He studied it. He noticed the subtle shift in color on the petals, the texture of the asphalt, the way she'd captured the resilience in that tiny plant. "You see the beauty in the struggle," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Most people just see the weed. You see the fight, the life." Tears pricked Audrey's eyes. He understood. In a few simple words, this quiet, unassuming old man had seen the very soul of her work. He saw what the gallery owners who sent her polite rejection letters never did. From that day on, he would always ask, "What are you creating today, Audrey?" She started bringing in her sketchbook, showing him the charcoal portraits of subway passengers and the quick, gestural drawings of city life. He'd offer quiet, insightful comments, pointing out an interesting use of shadow or a particularly expressive line. He never claimed to be an expert, but his observations were always astute. "This one," he said, pointing to a sketch of a tired-looking woman on the F train, her head resting against the window. "You captured her exhaustion, but you also gave her dignity. Her hand, they're strong. She's not broken." Their friendship became a quiet anchor in Audrey's turbulent life. Harry's presence was calming, a pocket of stillness in the daily chaos. Sam watched the strange bond develop with amusement and a touch of suspicion. "What's the deal with your mysterious old man?" she asked one day, wiping down the espresso machine. "You think he's some kind of secret agent? Or maybe a retired professor?" Audrey laughed. "I think he's just a lonely old man, Sam. He's kind. And he gets my art. It's nice to have someone who gets it." But there were odd little moments, inconsistencies that Audrey filed away without much thought. Once Harry was complaining about the draft from the door, and he absently mentioned that his home in Greenwich had the same problem in the East Wing. Greenwich? Audrey pictured a small, modest house, not an estate with wings. Another time he was talking about a difficult decision he had to make, and he muttered something about, "The board will never approve." What board? The one for his local library? The most peculiar incident happened on a Tuesday. A man in a razor-sharp suit, with an expensive watch and a perpetually stressed expression, burst into the café. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Harry. The man's face went pale. He started to approach, his mouth opening as if to speak, but Harry gave him a look. A subtle, almost imperceptible shake of the head, coupled with a glare so cold and authoritative, it seemed to belong to another person entirely. The suited man froze, then nodded curtly and backed out of the café as quickly as he'd entered. When Audrey brought Harry his coffee, he seemed completely unruffled. "Friend of yours?" she asked lightly. Harry took a slow sip. Former employee, prone to melodrama." He changed the subject immediately, asking about a new sketching technique she was trying. Audrey let it go. It was probably nothing. Harry had a life before he was the quiet old man in the corner of her cafe. It wasn't her business. One rainy afternoon, Audrey arrived at work looking utterly defeated. She was quiet, her movements heavy, her smile gone. Leo had had a bad night, a terrifying coughing fit that had landed them in the emergency room until 4 a.m. The doctors were recommending a new experimental treatment, a drug that showed incredible promise. The catch, as always, was the price. The insurance company called it elective and refused to cover it. The cost was astronomical, a figure so far beyond her reality, it might as well have been the distance to the moon. She didn't need to say a word. Harry saw it on her face the moment he walked in. "Audrey?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. The dam broke. The tears she'd been holding back all day streamed down her face. She mumbled an apology and fled to the stockroom, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. It was all too much. The bills, the exhaustion, the terror of losing her brother, the slow, painful death of her own dreams under the weight of it all. A few moments later, Harry was there. He didn't touch her or offer empty platitudes. He just stood in the doorway, a silent, steady presence. "Tell me," he said simply. And she did. She told him everything. About the new drug, the impossible cost, the crushing feeling of helplessness. She confessed her deepest fear, that her love and her hard work would not be enough to save her brother. Harry listened, his expression unreadable. When she was finished, her voice a raw whisper, he was silent for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and Audrey's ragged breathing. "The fight you see in the wheat, Audrey," he finally said, his voice imbued with a strange gravity. "The strength you see in the hands of the woman on the train, you have that too, more than anyone I have ever known." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, crisp business card. He pressed it into her hand. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m., go to this address. Ask for Jonathan Abernathy. Tell him Harry sent you. Tell him everything you just told me." Audrey looked down at the card. It was thick, expensive cardstock. Embossed in elegant silver letters were the words, Sterling Industries, Sterling Tower, Fifth Avenue. Below it was the name, Jonathan Abernathy, Chief Legal Counsel. Audrey stared at it, confused. Sterling Industries? The tech company? I don't understand. Harry, who is this? Harry's eyes met hers, and for the first time, the veil of the weary old man seemed to slip, revealing a glimpse of the immense power and authority that lay beneath. He's my lawyer, he said. Go, Audrey. Let us see if we can't find a way to make that flower of yours bloom. He turned and walked out of the stockroom, leaving Audrey standing there, holding a key to a world she couldn't possibly imagine, her life about to be irrevocably, terrifyingly, and magnificently changed. The next morning, Audrey stood before Sterling Tower, a monument of smoked glass and polished steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a shard of obsidian. It was a building that didn't just occupy space, it declared dominance. Dressed in her only presentable outfit, a simple black dress and a cardigan, she felt as small and out of place as the weed in her painting. The business card felt heavy and unreal in her hand. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and silent, serious people in expensive suits moved with a sense of urgent purpose. A massive, abstract sculpture, all twisting metal and sharp angles, dominated the center of the room. It was probably worth more than her apartment building. At the reception desk, a woman with immaculate hair and a professionally bored expression looked up. Can I help you? I have an appointment with Jonathan Abernathy, Audrey stammered, her voice barely a whisper. My name is Audrey Rosewood. Harry sent me. The receptionist's expression shifted instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a flicker of surprise and deference. She typed something into her computer. Of course, Miss Rosewood. Mr. Abernathy is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the penthouse. Penthouse? Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. This was all a mistake. Harry must have been a janitor here, or maybe a mailroom clerk who'd found a lost business card. The private elevator was a silent, wood-paneled box that ascended with dizzying speed. When the doors opened, she wasn't in an office, but in a breathtakingly large apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, a sea of autumn colors spread out like a royal carpet. The furniture was minimalist and modern, the art on the walls was original. She recognized a Rothko and a de Kooning, and the silence was absolute. A tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with silvering hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, stood waiting for her. He had the calm, unflappable demeanor of someone who dealt in billion-dollar problems before breakfast. Ms. Rosewood, I'm Jonathan Abernathy, he said, his voice smooth and precise. He didn't offer to shake her hand. Please, come in. He is waiting for you. He led her through the cavernous living room to a smaller, more intimate study. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in a modern hearth. And sitting in a large leather armchair, silhouetted against the window, was Harry. But it wasn't Harry. The worn tweed coat was gone, replaced by a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. His hair was neatly combed. The frailty she had perceived was gone, replaced by an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He still looked old, yes, but not defeated. He looked powerful. This was not Harry, the lonely old man. This was Harrison Sterling, the reclusive, legendary founder and CEO of Sterling Industries. A man Forbes magazine had dubbed the Ghost of Wall Street. Audrey stopped dead in her tracks, her mind struggling to reconcile the two images. The man who couldn't afford a cup of coffee was one of the richest men in the world. Harry, she breathed, the name feeling foolish on her lips. He offered a small, sad smile. Hello, Audrey. Please sit down. I believe I owe you an explanation. Audrey sank into the chair opposite him, her body numb with shock. Mr. Abernathy stood discreetly by the door, a silent sentinel. For the past 6 months, Harrison began, his voice the same gentle tone she knew. Yet now it carried the weight of boardrooms and global markets. I have been searching for something, not a company to acquire, not a new technology to invest in. I have been searching for a person. He paused, his pale blue eyes fixed on hers. I am not a well man, Audrey. The doctors have given me a year, perhaps less. I have a vast fortune, a global corporation, and a philanthropic foundation, the Sterling Legacy Foundation, with an endowment of several $billion. And I have no one to leave it to. Audrey frowned. But your family? Your son? She vaguely recalled reading about his son, a notorious playboy often featured in the tabloids. A shadow crossed Harrison's face. My son Donovan sees my legacy as his personal bank account. He possesses the Sterling name, but none of the Sterling character. He is greedy, short-sighted, and lacks the one quality essential to true leadership: empathy. To leave my life's work in his hands would be to watch it curdle into a monument of self-indulgence. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. So I began a search, a quiet one. I shed the trapping of my name and fortune. I wanted to find someone who was kind, not because they were being watched, but because it was their nature. Someone who understood the value of a dollar because they had so few of them. Someone who could see the beauty in a weed growing through concrete. The realization washed over Audrey in a dizzying wave. The forgotten wallet, the daily visits, his questions about her life, her art, her brother. It hadn't been a blossoming friendship. It had been a test, an elaborate 6-month-long job interview she never knew she was taking. The coffee, she whispered, that was a test. It was the beginning of one, he corrected gently. Your paying for my coffee showed compassion, but what came after showed character. You never mentioned it. You never treated me with pity. You treated me with dignity. You shared your dreams, your fears, your art. You gave to the homeless. You were patient with the rude. You worked tirelessly for your brother. You, Audrey Rosewood, a waitress earning minimum wage, are wealthier in spirit than any person I have ever met. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward and placed a thick leather-bound portfolio on the table between them. Mr. Sterling has a proposition for you, Ms. Rosewood. Harrison opened it. It was filled with legal documents, charts, and figures, with an astonishing number of zeros. First, Harrison said, pushing a single sheet of paper towards her, the Sterling Foundation will immediately cover all of Leo's medical expenses, including the experimental treatment, for the rest of his life. Consider it done. Audrey gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. But that is the smaller part of my offer, Harrison continued, his voice serious. I am not offering you a gift, Audrey. I am offering you a job, a responsibility. I want to name you as my successor, not as CEO of Sterling Industries. That will be managed by a professional trust. I want you to be the sole heir to my personal fortune, with the legal mandate to become the chairwoman of the Sterling Legacy Foundation upon my death. He gestured around the opulent room. All of this, the fortune, the art, the properties, it will all be yours, but it comes with one unbreakable condition. You must use its power, and the much greater power of the foundation, for good. You will run it. You will decide its mission. You will be my legacy. The room began to spin. Audrey's mind, which had been preoccupied with the price of paint and medicine just yesterday, was now being asked to comprehend the stewardship of billions of dollars. It was absurd. It was impossible. Me, she finally managed to say. But I'm a waitress. I'm an artist. I don't know anything about running a foundation. I don't belong in this world. That, Harrison Sterling said, his voice ringing with conviction, is precisely why you do. This world is drowning in people who belong. It is choking on ambition and entitlement. I am not looking for an MBA or a financial wizard. I am looking for a heart. The foundation doesn't need another suit, Audrey. It needs a soul. It needs an artist who can see the world differently. It needs someone who understands that the greatest investment is not in stocks, but in people. He looked at her, his expression pleading. Will you be my heir, Audrey? Will you be the heir of kindness? Audrey stared at the papers, at the powerful man who had disguised himself as a pauper, at the view of the city that suddenly seemed like a foreign land. Her entire world had been upended by a single cup of coffee. To say yes would be to save her brother, to secure her future beyond her wildest dreams. But it would also mean stepping into a life she wasn't prepared for, a world filled with vipers who would see her as an imposter, a nobody, a thief, a world that would almost certainly try to destroy her. Saying yes was the easy part. The word whispered in a state of shock in Harrison Sterling's penthouse was a key that unlocked a golden cage. Leo's treatment began immediately at a top private clinic, the relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from Audrey's chest. She quit her job at the Gilded Bean, leaving a bewildered but thrilled Sam with an enigmatic promise to explain later. She moved out of her cramped, drafty apartment and into a sleek, furnished corporate suite provided by the Sterling organization, a place so quiet and sterile it felt like living inside a cloud. But the silence was deceptive. The moment the news became semi-official within the inner circles of Sterling Industries, the vipers began to emerge from the shadows. The first and most venomous was Donovan Sterling. Audrey met him a week after her life had been turned upside down. Harrison had insisted on a formal dinner at his penthouse, a small affair meant to be an introduction. Donovan arrived late, radiating an aura of contemptuous privilege. He was handsome in a cruel, predatory way, with his father's sharp features hardened by arrogance. He didn't look at Audrey. He looked through her, his eyes cataloging her simple dress and lack of expensive jewelry with unconcealed disdain. "So," Donovan said, swirling a glass of what Audrey guessed was obscenely expensive wine. He addressed his father, but his sneer was aimed at her. "This is her, the charity case. The waitress you've decided is more worthy of the Sterling name than your own blood." "Donovan, that's enough," Harrison warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Is it?" Donovan shot back, his voice rising. "I've spent my entire life preparing to take my place in this family, to lead this company, and you hand over the heart of our legacy, the foundation, to a coffee slinger from Queens because she gave you $4? It's senility. The board will see it, the courts will see it, and I will make damn sure the world sees it." He finally turned his icy gaze on Audrey. "You have no idea what you've stepped into, little girl. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a shark tank, and you're bleeding," he stormed out, leaving a chilling silence in his wake. Harrison sighed, looking older and more tired than he ever had in his tweed coat. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, Audrey. That is what you are up against." Donovan's threat was not an idle one. The very next day, the attacks began. It started with a snide little piece in a high society gossip blog, hinting that the reclusive Harrison Sterling had taken up with a mysterious young woman of questionable background. It was a warning shot. The real offensive was launched a week later on the front page of the New York Chronicle, a notoriously aggressive tabloid. The headline screamed, "The Coffee Shop Cinderella, Waitress Accused of Manipulating Ailing Billionaire." The article, penned by a sleazy journalist named Rex Collins, was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted Audrey as a cunning gold digger who had preyed on a lonely, sick old man. Anonymous sources, clearly fed by Donovan, were quoted questioning her motives and her past. They twisted her poverty into a sign of instability and her artistic ambition into a desperate craving for fame. The article included a grainy photo of her, taken from across the street, looking exhausted on her way out of the Gilded Bean. She looked lost and vulnerable. They made her look like a predator. The story was everywhere. Audrey couldn't leave her apartment without feeling the stares. The doorman's polite greeting now seemed tinged with suspicion. The city that had been her home now felt like a hostile labyrinth. Mr. Abernathy, her stoic guide in this new world, tried to shield her. "This is Donovan's opening salvo," he explained in a calm, measured tone during one of their daily briefing sessions. "He's trying to establish a public narrative. The vulnerable old man and the conniving younger woman. It's a classic trope. The board of the foundation is conservative. They value stability and reputation above all else. Donovan wants to make you seem like a liability." Audrey was being educated in the brutal mechanics of power. Abernathy was her tutor. He walked her through the foundation's vast portfolio, explaining its various initiatives in medical research, global education, and the arts. Her head swam with acronyms, financial projections, and the sheer scale of it all. It was like learning to fly a spaceship when she'd only ever ridden a bicycle. Her one refuge was her art, In the sterile quiet of her new apartment, she set up an easel. She tried to paint, to lose herself in the familiar comfort of color and texture. But the fear and anxiety followed her. Her brushstrokes were hesitant, her colors muddy. The portrait she tried to paint of Leo came out looking strained and worried. She was painting her own anxiety. Worse still, Donovan's attacks began to target the things she loved. A small gallery that had once shown a single piece of her work in a group show suddenly received a visit from a fire marshal for a surprise inspection, followed by a tax audit. The owner, terrified, called Audrey and politely asked her to retrieve her painting. Rex Collins wrote a follow-up piece mocking her fledgling art career, framing it as another part of her scheme to appear more sophisticated. Donovan was not just attacking her, he was methodically dismantling her identity, trying to erase the very qualities Harrison had chosen her for. He wanted to prove she was nothing without the Sterling name, a nobody who had simply gotten lucky. The breaking point came during a preliminary, informal meeting with a few key members of the Sterling Legacy Foundation's board. It was held in a sterile, intimidating boardroom on the 50th floor of Sterling Tower. The board members were polite but distant, their eyes filled with cautious skepticism. They were titans of industry, seasoned philanthropists, and academics. And Audrey was the waitress. She tried to answer their questions about her vision for the foundation, speaking nervously about funding community art programs and supporting grassroots initiatives. She could feel their polite disbelief. Then one of the board members, a stern-faced woman named Beatrice Vance, cleared her throat. "Ms. Rosewood," she said, her voice like chipping ice, "we've all read the papers. While we try to ignore such sensationalism, we have a fiduciary duty to protect the foundation's reputation. Can you address the concerns that your sudden and unusual appointment might bring a certain level of instability to Mr. Sterling's legacy?" It was a direct challenge, wrapped in corporate jargon. They were asking her to defend herself against Donovan's smears. Audrey opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her heart pounded. All she could hear was Donovan's voice in her head. "It's a shark tank, and you're bleeding." She looked around the table at the impassive, powerful faces. They didn't see Audrey Rosewood, the artist, the sister, the person Harrison had trusted. They saw the headline, "The Coffee Shop Cinderella." And in that moment, she felt like a complete and utter fraud. The disastrous board meeting sent Audrey into a spiral of doubt. She retreated to her silent, glass-walled apartment, the spectacular view of the city now feeling like a constant, mocking reminder of how high she was and how far she had to fall. The weight of Harrison Sterling's legacy felt less like a gift and more like a crown of thorns. Each barb a headline, a skeptical glance, a whispered accusation. Donovan, sensing blood in the water, escalated his campaign. He was no longer content with just poisoning the public narrative. He began to use the intricate machinery of the Sterling Empire against her. His next move was diabolical in its cruelty. The private clinic where Leo was receiving his new treatment was a subsidiary of a larger healthcare corporation in which Sterling Industries held a significant, though not controlling, stake. One morning, Audrey received a call from a frantic nurse at the clinic. Leo's treatment protocol had been paused pending an administrative review. The official reason was a bureaucratic tangle of paperwork and insurance codes. The real reason was Donovan. He had used his influence, called in favors, and created a bottleneck designed to terrify Audrey. He was holding her brother's health hostage. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. This was the one line she had never imagined he would cross. Her reputation, her future, those were things she could stomach losing. But Leo's life was non-negotiable. She called Mr. Abernathy, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "He's targeting my brother, Jonathan. He's interfering with his medical care. This has to stop." Abernathy's voice was grave. "I'll make some calls, Audrey. I will fix this. But you need to understand what this means. This is not a boardroom squabble anymore. Donovan is declaring total war. He is trying to prove that you are powerless, that you cannot protect the things you care about without Harrison's direct intervention. He wants you to run back to Harrison and prove you're nothing more than a frightened child." Abernathy was right. Running to Harrison for help felt like a concession of defeat, an admission that she couldn't handle the pressure. She felt utterly trapped. If she fought back, Donovan might escalate further. If she did nothing, Leo suffered. For the first time since accepting Harrison's offer, she seriously considered giving it all up. She could walk away, take the lifetime of medical care for Leo that Harrison had already guaranteed, and disappear. She could go back to her art, back to a life of anonymity. That evening, consumed by indecision, she went to visit Harrison. She found him in his study looking frail, a plaid blanket draped over his legs. The indomitable titan of industry was gone. In his place was the old, tired man she had first met at the Gilded Bean. He had a sixth sense for her moods. "He went after your brother," Harrison said. It wasn't a question. Audrey nodded, her throat tight. "How did you know?" "I know my son," he said with a deep, sorrowful sigh. "He has always believed that love is a weakness to be exploited. He learned it from my first wife, his mother." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit, Audrey. There is something you need to know." He proceeded to tell her a story she'd never read in the business journals. He spoke of his early years, building his company from nothing. He spoke of his first wife, a beautiful and ambitious socialite who loved the fruits of his labor but resented the labor itself. "She taught Donovan that affection was a transaction," Harrison said, his gaze distant, "that everything and everyone had a price. When she left me, she tried to turn him against me, telling him I loved my business more than my own son. Perhaps in some ways she was right. I buried myself in my work. I thought providing for him was the same as raising him. I failed him, Audrey. I gave him everything he wanted, so he never learned the value of anything he had." He looked at her, his eyes clear and filled with a painful honesty. "I tested him, years ago. I told him I was considering stepping down and dedicating the bulk of my fortune to the foundation. I wanted to see if he had any interest in the philanthropic work, in building a legacy of giving. Do you know what he did? He hired a team of lawyers to see if he could have me declared mentally incompetent so he could seize control of the assets. That was the day I lost my son." The confession hung in the air, thick with decades of regret. Audrey finally understood. This wasn't just about finding a worthy heir. This was an act of redemption, a father's last, desperate attempt to ensure that his life's work would stand for the compassion and integrity his own son lacked. He hadn't chosen Audrey just for her kindness. He had chosen her because she was everything Donovan was not. "Why are you telling me this?" Audrey asked softly. "Because you need to know that this fight is not about you," Harrison said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old strength. "You are a symbol. You represent a world that Donovan cannot comprehend and therefore despises. A world where value is not measured in dollars but in character. If you quit, you are not just letting me down. You are letting his cynical, broken view of the world win." He reached over and patted her hand, his touch light and papery. "I chose you because you are a fighter. I saw it in your painting of that weed. Don't let him crush you. Don't let him turn you into one of his polished, empty acquisitions. He is attacking your brother to break your spirit, so the only way to win is not to break." His words, steeped in his own pain and regret, were like a steel rod being inserted into her spine. Her fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar anger. Donovan had miscalculated. He thought threatening Leo would make her weak, would make her run. He didn't understand that threatening Leo was the one thing that would make her fight to the death. She left the penthouse that night with a newfound resolve. She was no longer the frightened waitress, the imposter in a world of sharks. She was Harrison Sterling's chosen heir, and it was time she started acting like it. The next morning, she walked into Mr. Abernathy's office. Her demeanor had changed. The hesitation was gone. "Jonathan," she said, her voice clear and steady, "cancel your calls to the clinic. Donovan wants a war. He's going to get one, but we're not going to fight it in the shadows. We're going to fight it in the boardroom. Call a full official meeting of the Sterling Legacy Foundation Board. I want to formally present my vision. It's time they stopped seeing me as a headline and started seeing me as their future." Abernathy looked at her, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. "And Leo's treatment will be the first item on my agenda," Audrey declared. "I'm going to propose the foundation fully acquires and funds that clinic, turning it into a world-class, nonprofit pediatric research hospital. Let's see Donovan try to interfere with that. She had found her footing. The crown was still heavy, but she was finally learning how to wear it. The boardroom on the 50th floor felt even colder and more imposing than before. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lights, reflecting the stern, expectant faces of the 10 board members. Beatrice Vance sat at the head of the table like a stone judge. Harrison was there, seated at the opposite end, looking frail but resolute. He had insisted on attending, a silent show of support, and at the center of it all, a seat had been left for Audrey. Donovan was also present at the insistence of his lawyers, claiming his right as a potential stakeholder. He sat smugly, a slim leather portfolio in front of him, a predatory smile playing on his lips. He believed he had already won. He had painted Audrey as an unstable, manipulative gold digger, and now she had called this meeting, a desperate move he was certain would expose her incompetence once and for all. Audrey walked in, not with the timid uncertainty of her last visit, but with a quiet, focused calm. She wasn't wearing a power suit or trying to be someone she wasn't. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress. In her hands, she didn't carry a tablet or a binder full of financial reports. She carried a large, flat artist's portfolio. She took her seat, her eyes meeting Donovan's for a brief moment. His smirk widened. He thought she was bringing artwork to a gunfight. Beatrice Vance called the meeting to order. Ms. Rosewood, you requested this meeting to present your vision for the future direction of the foundation. The floor is yours. Before Audrey could speak, Donovan stood up. If I may, Madam Chairwoman, before we indulge in Ms. Rosewood's artistic fancies, I have a matter of urgent importance regarding the security and integrity of this foundation. I have compiled a dossier, prepared by my investigative team, that I believe the board must see. He began to circulate his leather-bound folders. Murmurs rippled through the room as the board members opened them. Audrey's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. The dossier was Rex Collins's gutter journalism repackaged for a corporate audience. There were photos of her old, run-down apartment building, presented as evidence of a transient and unstable lifestyle. There were quotes from disgruntled former customers at the Gilded Bean, likely paid for their testimony. They even had a copy of her financial records, showing her meager income and mounting debts, framed as the motive for her con. The centerpiece was a heavily edited, secret recording of a conversation between Audrey and Sam, where Audrey complained about her financial struggles. Taken out of context, it sounded like a desperate woman willing to do anything for money. As you can see, Donovan said, his voice dripping with false concern, this is not a person to whom we can entrust a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic institution. This is a desperate, cunning opportunist who has taken advantage of my father's declining health. To make her the face of this foundation would be to invite ridicule, scandal, and endless legal challenges. It would be an act of fiduciary suicide. The board members looked grim. They flipped through the pages, their faces hardening. They looked from the dossier to Audrey, their skepticism solidifying into outright distrust. She could feel the room turning against her. This was Donovan's checkmate. When he finished, a heavy silence fell. All eyes were on Audrey. This was her moment. Break or fight. She stood up, her hands steady, and walked to the head of the table. She didn't look at the dossier. She looked at the faces around the table. Mr. Sterling is correct about one thing, she began, her voice clear and carrying across the room. I was desperate. Any person who has watched a loved one struggle to breathe, who has had to choose between paying for medicine or paying for rent, knows that desperation. My past is not a secret to be exposed. It is the foundation of who I am. She opened her artist portfolio. She didn't pull out a painting. She pulled out the first of a series of large professional photographs. It was a picture of Leo's face, smiling, but with the clear plastic tubes of a nasal cannula visible. This is my brother, Leo, she said. He is the reason for my desperation, and he is the reason for my vision. She placed another photo on the table. It was the exterior of the clinic where he was being treated. Mr. Donovan Sterling recently used his influence to interfere with the life-saving treatment my brother receives at this facility. He did it to intimidate me, to break me. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Attacking a sick child was a line even they found distasteful. He thought it would prove I was weak, Audrey continued, her voice gaining strength. Instead, it gave me my first proposal as potential chairwoman. I propose the Sterling Legacy Foundation fully acquire this clinic and its parent research company. I propose we expand it, remove the barrier of profit, and turn it into the Leo Rosewood Pediatric Care and Research Center, a nonprofit institution dedicated to ensuring that no family ever has to feel the desperation that I have felt. She then turned to the artistic core of her argument. She pulled out her painting of the weed growing through the concrete. She placed it on the table. My father, she said, looking directly at Harrison, who nodded slightly, chose me because I am an artist. Not because he wants me to hang pretty pictures in the lobby, but because an artist's job is to see what others overlook. For years, this foundation has done incredible work. It has funded universities, built museums, and endowed orchestras. These are noble causes. They are the great, beautiful trees in the forest. But my vision for this foundation is to also look down at the forest floor. She pulled out more of her work. A charcoal sketch of a homeless veteran sleeping on a park bench, a watercolor of a community garden in a poor neighborhood, a photograph of a single mother juggling her child and 2 grocery bags on the subway. This foundation has a multi-billion-dollar endowment. Mr. Donovan Sterling sees it as a treasure chest. I see it as a toolbox. He sees power. I see potential. He wants to fund the grand and the glorious. I want to fund the weed in the pavement. I want to create micro-grants for single mothers starting small businesses. I want to build state-of-the-art shelters that offer job training and mental health services. I want to fund art programs in inner-city schools, not so every child becomes a painter, but so every child learns how to see the world with an artist's eyes, to find the beauty, the dignity, and the potential that everyone else overlooks. She looked around the table, her gaze locking with each board member. You have a dossier in front of you that tells you who I was, my poverty, my struggles, but my portfolio tells you how I see the world. That is my vision, a legacy not just of grand monuments, but of millions of small, defiant acts of kindness, resilience, and hope. A legacy of weeds. Now you must decide which is more valuable to the future of this foundation. She finished and stood in the silent room, her heart pounding, but her spirit soaring. She had not defended herself. She had defined herself. The silence was broken by Beatrice Vance. She slowly closed Donovan's dossier, pushing it to the side. She picked up the painting of the weed and studied it for a long moment. Ms. Rosewood, she said, her voice devoid of its earlier iciness, replaced by a tone of thoughtful consideration. Tell us more about these micro-grants. Donovan Sterling stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His perfectly crafted attack had just been dismantled by a handful of sketches and a story about a weed. He had tried to fight her with power and money, but she had come to the battle armed with a soul. And in the sterile, silent boardroom, it was proving to be the more powerful weapon. The board meeting was the turning point. Donovan's last desperate move, a lawsuit to declare his father incompetent, backfired spectacularly, cementing his public ruin and leaving him powerless. Soon after, Harrison Sterling passed away peacefully, his final, ironclad will confirming Audrey as his sole heir and the foundation's new chairwoman. Audrey mourned him not as a benefactor, but as the friend who had seen her true worth. She then embraced her role with purpose, transforming the foundation with her vision. Her first act was to establish the Leo Rosewood Pediatric Center, a beacon of hope for families in need. Next, she launched her Weed Project, funding overlooked community initiatives and giving struggling artists the support she never had. She infused the cold corporate world of philanthropy with a soul. A year later, she found herself back at the Gilded Bean. When a young student came up short, fumbling for her wallet in a panic, Audrey saw a reflection of the past. Without a word, she handed the barista a $100 bill. Her coffee is on me, she said softly, and the next 25 people having a bad day. Leaving her own cup untouched on Harry's old table, a silent tribute, she walked out into the city. She finally understood that her true inheritance wasn't the billions, but the profound, world-changing legacy of being an heir of kindness. And so, Audrey's story reminds us that our true worth is not defined by our bank account, but by the richness of our character. A simple $4 act of kindness, an investment made with no expectation of return, unlocked a legacy worth billions. It proves that in a world that often rewards greed and ambition, there is still an unmatched power in empathy, integrity, and seeing the value in others when they feel invisible. Her journey from the coffee shop to the boardroom wasn't about becoming a different person, but about gaining the power to be more of who she already was. What small act of kindness could you perform today? You never know whose life or whose world you might change. If this story moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds matter, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that will inspire and make you think. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.